Okay, I think we'll get going. We are absolutely packed tonight, I'm delighted to say. So welcome to everybody who's here and those who are being admitted as I speak. Hello and welcome to tonight's event. I'm Rebecca Taylor, the editor of JR, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the launch of our autumn issue, which has a special focus on Lithuania. So firstly, please make sure all your mics are on mute, and we've got a great lineup of guests on our panel, and you'll have a chance to speak to them directly in the second half of our programme. And for that, you can use the chat function on Zoom to send in any questions or comments. But for now, please keep yourself on mute. Well, before we look at Lithuania in more depth, I'm going to begin tonight by giving you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the new autumn issue of the magazine. So, Emma, if we can have a look at the pages, some of the pages from the magazine of our new issue. And we'll start with this piece on the BBC. So as you might know, this year the BBC is marking its 100th anniversary. And in our current issue, the former BBC producer Daniel Snowman spotlights how a group of Jewish emigres fleeing Nazi-occupied Europe helped shape the organisation. And you might be familiar with some of the names that he covers in the piece. There's Jacob Bronowski. I remember my family watching his seminal series, The Ascent of Man, and you might also remember that back in the 1970s. There's people like Martin Esslin, the head of radio drama, and the news journalist John Tusa. And many of these emigres were at the forefront of introducing innovation to the organisation. If you look very carefully at the bottom of this spread, you can see a Dalek. And I think that's probably the first ever Dalek to star in Jewish Renaissance magazine. And the Dalek is there because the Russian emigre Sidney Newman was involved in some of this new technology, and he also proposed a new sci-fi series, which eventually became Doctor Who. So we've got the BBC. We also look at the work of Lucian Freud. There's a new show of his work opening at the Freud Museum. And in a fascinating piece, the art critic Martin Gayford explores the background to the really personal family portraits that characterize much of his art. And elsewhere in the magazine, actually, I should just say about both the BBC and the Lucian Freud piece, they tie in with the series of lectures that we're running on both of those topics. That's the BBC at 100 and Lucian Freud, and I'll tell you more about those events and how you can join our ongoing online programs about them at the end of this event. So moving into our book section, we look at the writer, the short story writer and political activist Grace Paley in a piece by her colleague and one-time student, Joan Silber. That's a lovely piece from Joan. And then we also have an interview with an up-and-coming literary talent, Omer Friedlander, who here we have him in conversation with his grandfather, the eminent Holocaust historian, Saul Friedlander. And they cover a wide range of topics and talk particularly about Saul's childhood in Prague. Also, this being November, that heralds the annual UK Jewish Film Festival, which we cover in the magazine. We've got reviews of a new animation film about the painter Charlotte Salomon, and we've also got a discussion of a new award-winning Israeli comedy, Karaoke, which illuminates the relationship between Sephardi and Ashkenazi Jews in contemporary Israel. But the main focus of the magazine, of course, is Lithuania. And I'm sure, like me, you've watched the news in apprehension as the war in Ukraine has spread a stain across the whole of the Baltic region. Lithuania is on the front line of events in the region, but today we're going to be looking at its long Jewish history and culture. Lithuania's Jewish community had a distinctive and rich cultural connection. From the 16th century, it became a centre of first religious learning, and later in the 20th century, it was a hub of modernist poetry, literature, art, and ideas. This fierce cultural connection was sustained even through the terrible days of the Holocaust. And in one of our pieces that we're flagging up here, we hear from the author David Fishman about the Paper Brigade. That was a band of courageous writers and scholars and poets who risked their lives to hide Jewish books and documents in the Vilna ghetto during the Second World War. In another article, we hear from a writer who lived in Kaliningrad. That's the tiny Russian enclave on the border of Lithuania. It was formerly the Prussian capital, Königsberg, and it played a significant role in the European Jewish Enlightenment. But since World War II, its Jewish presence has remained something of a mystery. On that note, I'm going to hand over now to our guests, who will be able to tell you much more about Lithuania's Jewish history and culture. And as I say, while we're listening to them, send in any questions you've got using the chat function on Zoom. So I'm delighted to welcome our first guest, Milda Jakulyte. Milda is the chief curator at the Lost Shtetl Museum in Sędziowa. Milda worked on the Holocaust exposition at the Vilna Gaon Jewish State Museum in 2006, before starting at the Lost Shtetl Museum in 2015. Based in the former shtetl of Sędziowa, the museum is due to open in 2024 with the aim of presenting the history, culture, and daily life of Lithuanian Jews. Her work involves traveling the world to locate and collect stories, photographs, and artifacts from Sędziowa and other Lithuanian locations. So, Milda, let's go over to you and hear more about your work.
So, hello everyone. It's nice to see you all here, and it's a pleasure to talk what we are doing in Sędziowa in Lithuania, which is we are building a Jewish museum, new Jewish museum. And as it was said, I worked at the Lost Shtetl already for 7 years, but the project started 10 years ago. And since then, we have been creating a commemorative complex which includes parts of Jewish life and Jewish history in the town of Sędziowa.
Milda, so, can I just stop you 1 minute?
Yeah.
We're missing a little bit of what you're saying. Just if you just face the screen as much as possible. We're just losing a little bit of what you're saying.
Okay. I'll try. That's
better. That's better.
Okay. Thank you. So, as you can see, Sędziowa is located in a central part of Lithuania and not far away from a highway connecting Vilnius, Lithuanian capital, and Riga, Latvian capital. It's almost in a midway between those two. And we are surrounded by popular tourist destinations, so I hope you will make a journey and visit us when we are open in 2024. So the architecture of the building is very special and appears from outside as a whole building and also as a components of entire village. And we are happy and proud that the architect of our museum is Rainer Maklamäki from Finland, who also is known for architecture of a Polin Museum in Warsaw. So when I started to work, we had only an idea about the museum, and this task is still very young to all of us. But slowly this idea became more developed, and our team grew and grew from 1 person to 8 right now. So the exhibition of the museum is devoted to the history of the Jews of the Shtetl of Sędziowa and is very site-oriented. And the main focus is interwar period, so between First and Second World Wars, and tells the stories of Jewish community members in Sędziowa and their lives. And during that time, according to the census of 1923, we can picture Shadow as a small shtetl with almost 3,000 inhabitants, of whom almost 1,000 were Jews. So the goal of the museum is to engage visitors about little-known history and culture of the Lost Jewish Shtetl, mainly through the telling the stories of the Jews who lived in our town. And you can change the slide. And our visitors must first of all see the people, and we seek to give the faces of those who live there, their voices, their names, and to those who have now become anonymous mass of Holocaust victims. In order to realize what we have lost, we have to appreciate what we had. And since the start, biggest part of our focus has been the research, and we are working with more than 40 institutions around the world, and museums, libraries, archives, and private collections. We also have a connection to the descendant who lives mostly in Israel, South Africa, United States, and UK, and Australia. Some of them we visited, and we took about 40 interviews. And the people also donated the items their ancestors brought from Shadow. They shared their photo albums with us. So our collection is growing from those donations, and also from the research. So the story we are telling in the exhibition will be really based on those personal level, personal interviews and their albums and documents. So our research and curatorial work it's continuous, and we still working on it. But now we added another perspective to our work, which is education. And more than a year, for more than a year, we are creating programs. We are starting to visit schools and make educational activities with the pupils of various age. And this educational work is also almost equal to the curatorial work, as we believe that museum should be the place for inspiration and dialogue and fun and connection. And we want to be that platform, so encourage people to speak to us, and with that and research the Lithuanian past. So yes, and yeah, I already mentioned that. And some activities, of course, will take place only after museum opens. And for now, we are exerting great efforts to preparing those programs. and but also we are working with the local community and from Šeduva, and we want to engage local residents in the unveiling monuments and marking commemorative dates. As you saw in the previous slide, we opened the monument for the destroyed Šeduva synagogues, and also here we made a tour of audio stories in the town, so the local people, but also visitors can learn and show their interest and honor and memory of the Jews of Šeduva. And to add to this, we are really happy to and proud to receive important art donation by the son of Litvak sculptor Michael Brenner. Having this donation, we made a traveling exhibition of his works, and this year it was already in 2 places and will travel soon to the 3rd one. So it's really great that we can show the art and invite people to see it not only in the capital but also in more distant places from Vilnius. So I invite you to follow our work, and especially if you have roots in Šeduva, please contact us and join our virtual community. Thank you.
Thank you, Milda. And apologies about the sound. There's possibly, you just need to go a little bit nearer to your laptop, Milda. We missed a little bit, but I'm not sure why it was slightly.
I can come closer.
Yes, we will maybe ask you some more questions about the museum later on. But thank you, and for the slides, which certainly showed the enormous amount of construction work that's going on. It looks like an amazing project, and I think it also has the involvement of the family of Grigory Kanovich, doesn't it? As far as I know, this is the Lithuanian writer who has written so much about shtetl life.
Yes, son of Grigory, Sergei Kanovich is our director and leader of the project.
Okay, thank you, Milda. Okay, all right, we'll now go back to Lithuania, and we'll speak to our next guest, Dr. Lara Lempertienė, the head of the Judaica Research Center at the National Library of Lithuania, where she is also the curator of its Judaica collection. Her field of expertise is the cultural history of European and Lithuanian Jewry. She's curated many exhibitions, written numerous articles, and is the editor of several books on that topic, and has also organized cultural and academic events on the subject in Lithuania and abroad. And just a reminder, if people who are just entering now could make sure they are on mute, and we'll go to Lara now.
Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me first to take part in that special issue of Jewish Renaissance. It was a great honor, and also to participate in that launch. And I'm really happy that there is a lot of actually attention to Lithuania, to Jewish Lithuania now, from all over the world. But paradoxically, I might be even more happy that there is a lot of attention to it from inside Lithuania, and it is rather not that it is a new phenomenon, but it's a growing phenomenon, and that the fact that Lithuanian society is now more mature than it used to be, and it is ready to accept the fact that the Jewish life in Lithuania has been for centuries an organic part of Lithuanian history. I I think in that the work of the institutions of Jewish culture is seminal. So I'm very proud and humbled at the same time to participate in that work as a representative of a Judaica Research Center in the National Library of Lithuania. And I will tell you for a short time that I have something about our activities. The center was established rather recently in 2017 and was given a custodianship on the collection of books and periodicals that the National Library had for a long time. And what is interesting, going from Rebecca's introduction, just for how long does the National Library had that collection, had that amount of Jewish books and periodicals, and the amount is very big. It is exactly from the end of the Second World War and the Nazi occupation, and the fact that those things survived the Holocaust and Nazi plundering is actually due to the heroic work of the people of the Paper Brigade, and after the war, some courageous Lithuanians and Poles and non-Jews who tried to preserve those things, then they were left without actually custodians. For a short time, just several years immediately after the war, in the euphoria of the victory, the Soviet regime was more liberal to the Jewish, to the development of the Jewish culture, and allowed for establishing a Jewish museum in Vilnius. But it was only for several years, and the moment museum was closed, it was officially in 1949, the things that survived the war were hidden and recovered after the war, and what was gathered again at the museum during the first war, after war years, were again at risk from the Soviets this time. So the National Library, through several periods, intermediate periods, took responsibility for those things. And the moment museum was closed, the books and periodicals appeared at the National Library. And just so and we worked with those collections. I myself was with the Lithuanian Library for many years, and we worked with this book and periodicals for many years without having any special department at the National Library till 2017, when the the directorate of the National Library decided that the collection is too big and requires much more attention, and so it needs to have a special division. And it just so happened that the same year, when we existed for like a couple of months, we discovered already as a center at the same National Library of Lithuania a huge collection of Jewish manuscripts and printed ephemera and other documents which were forgotten. They were taken into the National Library under the same circumstances, but since the library, it's a collection of books and periodicals traditionally. So these were brought to the fore and worked with, and the documents were forgotten for decades. So the same year we were established as a center, we became just custodians for a much bigger collection and much bigger, testimony for the Jewish culture in Lithuania and Vilnius than we thought we were. And this is now our main mission. As Milda mentioned, it is preservation and research. So that's what we do. And here, before I show you several views of some things we have, I would also make such a statement of my views on what is to be done now when the Jewish community in Lithuania is so small and dwindling, and with all good intentions, it can't be fully the only agency for preservation the huge remaining material and non-material heritage and legacy of Lithuanian Jews. I think that cultural institutions which are not officially Jewish institutions, but are connected to the Jewish culture and history should come to help and come to aid and just augment the efforts of the Jewish community. And that is precisely what we're trying to do. And I'm very happy to say that we have support not only from the National Library in that mission, but also in understanding of the importance of this mission from many, many partners and also institutions which are not entirely connected to the preservation of Jewish culture and history, but like a museum that has their exhibitions from time to time, let's say on Vilnius history. Many of them on Vilnius history, on Kaunas history and history of other Lithuanian places. Increasingly, they put the Jewish component into exhibiting as well, and they also consult us for our documents. So do also the local museums forming their permanent exhibits. They also include local Jewish history, and there are more and more books commissioned on that topic also by institutions which are not officially Jewish, by several different publishing houses, by the same museums that publish materials on their local history. But returning to our, and we are very happy to be in contact with them, to monitor their activities, to try to help when they need help, and especially being able to help. And I would like to show you several things that we have, which are, as I said, testimonies to the richness and variety of the Jewish culture of Lithuania in the past, and also reminders of our own responsibility for that past after the heroic efforts of people who gave their all to preserve all those materials. We try to continue their work as best we can. Just let me share my screen. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so we look at our work as it called here, bridges of memory. We connect the past and our day through those documents, through study, through, and especially, oh, sorry, I don't know, and especially through presenting them, through exhibiting them, through writing about them, and through connecting different interested parts in those very different parts of our collection. And here we have from very, very old Hebrew books, which are which could be not so unique in the world perspective, but they're absolutely unique in Lithuania. And for example, this is from 1548, one of many old Jewish books we have. And for now, we have a project of restoring those books. They used to belong to the famous Strashun Library in Lithuania, which was the first Jewish public library, and later on, when there were more Jewish libraries in Lithuania, remained one of the most significant. We have some historical photos. Here you see a tree that grew on the, as they say, said, on the grave of the righteous proselyte, the person who we don't know exactly did he exist or didn't he. He was inspired by the work of the famous Vilna Gaon, and his grave used to be alongside the grave of the Vilna Gaon. We don't know if such person existed, but this tree did exist on the Jewish cemetery and was a site of interest in its own time. And now through that photo, we know how did it look. Of course, documents of the Jewish modernity, art, literary, and scholarly modernity. And here we see the picture, collective picture of the YIVO Institute that was established in Vilnius in 1925 and happily survived the Holocaust as an institution, albeit in New York, continues its work. And among their many amazing projects, there is also this. Freud, who was already mentioned today, and it's not intentionally that I put this into presentation, but I think it's very nice that I have it. It's the translation into Yiddish of Freud's introduction to psychoanalysis, translated by the director of the YIVO Institute, Max Weinreich, who was personally interested in psychoanalysis. And in the first, it was in 3 parts, and in the first part was published a letter from Freud with gratitude to YIVO Institute for translating his work. And of course, Freud was also a patron of the YIVO Institute. We have testimonies of the development of Jewish children literature, and of course, all of you know what it is, even if you don't immediately read it in Yiddish. It's, of course, the Book of Jungle of Rudyard Kipling with very nice illustrations, and we have a lot more Jewish books and periodicals in Vilnius. What is very important for us that we have in our collections traces of the evolving Jewish-Lithuanian dialogue. And here I'm speaking not about Vilnius, but about independent Lithuania. This is one of a few Jewish-Lithuanian dictionaries, practical dictionaries. This was published in Kaunas in 1940, but there were more. And there are other signs of that dialogue. This is a publication of, this is a translation of Lithuanian folk songs into Hebrew, made by a person who later was known as Leah Goldberg. Now she published their translations under her literary name as a young, actually a high school student. And it is very important that Leah Goldberg, national poet of Israel, began her actually poetical work by translations of Lithuanian poetry, folk poetry, which was important for her and very important for us as a fact, because this dialogue was unfortunately brutally interrupted by the Holocaust and should begin actually anew after many decades of very painful memory, and is slowly developing now again. Of course, there are documents of another not such peaceful and not such nice period. Those are documents from the ghetto police, a huge amount of just orders for arrest of people in the ghetto. And here are one of the reports of the paper brigade, actually, who were made by Nazis very cynically to sort the Jewish books, periodicals, and other things that were plundered from all Jewish institutions, brought to one place, and the same Jewish intellectuals who used to work in those organizations were made to sort them for or destroying or bringing by Germans to Germany, and they did it because they also used the opportunity to hide some of the documents and just save what they could. And this is the document from after the war. This is a picture of Abba Kovner, not from our collections, but this document it's an appeal of Jewish intelligentsia to the authorities of restoring the Institute of Jewish Culture, as they call that, and they had in mind, of course, YIVO. What is important here, Abba Kovner signed these documents. You could not see the date. It's 44. Vilnius was liberated before the official end of the Second World War. People came to Vilnius who survived, who maybe were, as Abba Kovner, in the partisan movement, and they immediately began to care for cultural treasures, retrieve them, gather them, and ask authorities to give them protection. The institute wasn't restored, of course, but this document is immensely important for us. And this is another member, not another member, actually, Abba Kovner wasn't a member of the paper brigade, but the poet Avram Sutskever was. He was active as a poet before the war. On the eve of the war, he was very active as a cultural. His actual poetical and cultural activities in the ghetto was immense. And so when he came, he then left for the partisans. And when he came to Vilnius, who immediately also began to care for Jewish heritage, and he was one of the establisher of the Jewish Museum. He was disillusioned in the Soviet regime before the museum was closed and left, but this is the moment when he still was here, and you see the some packs of documents that were retrieved from their hiding place. And because I don't have much time, I want to just finish by saying that presentation of those treasures is very, very important for us. Among other our activities, it just has a place of great importance because they were hidden, actually literally hidden for so many years. So we exhibit them, of course, at the exhibitions. It is a normal way. We write about them, and also we published some of them. The same Avram Sutskever somehow left some of his literary heritage in Vilnius, and we found that those things, those manuscripts, some of the manuscripts in this collection of documents, and among them were several manuscript books written in the ghetto, not just created in the ghetto, but also written in his own hand and made in a manuscript book. And we publish it in 3 languages with the help of the YIVO Institute in New York as a joint project. The manuscript is called 10 Lieder, 10 poems. So we put the original text and the facsimile view of the manuscript into the book, also translations into Lithuanian and English. And by that, we launched a series, Reading Jewish Heritage. And the second item of this series, there are only 2 so far, is the autobiography of the 12 years old Gal Epstein from Vilnius, which was also found among those documents. The autobiography author for us was this little girl, but when we lent the manuscript, even before the publication, to the YIVO Institute for their exhibition, the family was found because somebody told them about the exhibition. In that way, we made connection with Beba Epstein's son, and who told us the whole story of his mother, who thank God she survived and lived a long life. So we connected him to the edition. He wrote a very moving article for that edition, and we were very happy that this initiative of ours to present this document literally brought her to life and into the process of Jewish history, which continues in that way. And we try to be a little part of that, although we know, and this we called one of our exhibitions, that we only can present reflections in a shattered mirror. We can't restore the whole picture. Many things has been lost and irretrievably lost. But what we do have, we cherish and hope that we can share our concern and our love for those things with the world. Thank you very much. You're muted.
I'm muted. Thank you, Lara. That's better. That was fascinating. Thank you. And just to flag up, there is an online exhibition, isn't there, about Beppe Epstein, which Evo has put together. Evo, just for those of you who don't know, it's such an amazing resource, and a lot of that material came from this, the collections that the Paper Brigade were able to save, and then was taken over to New York, where this archive was able to be safe there in New York after the war. They have this incredible archive, and we have a section in the magazine every issue called The Yiddishists, and we have covered the most incredible breadth of material, from much of it to do with pre-war Europe, about sports, nature, all to do with Yiddish culture before the war. It's a great resource, and I think you've been working very closely with them, haven't you, at the library to digitize the latest findings, which were in 2017, more collections of this material.
Right, yeah, and we are in constant contact with Eva. So we know, they know about our work and our collection, and they were the first a part of the library itself who learned about this discovery.
Yeah, it's really wonderful work. All right, thank you, Lara. Let's move on. And also based in Lithuania, we're going to now speak to Richard Schofield. Richard is the director of the International Centre for Litvak Photography, which is based in Kaunas. He has formerly been involved in projects for young people across Lithuania, using photography to introduce and create an understanding of the country's Jewish past. One of his current initiatives is the Useless Archive, which, along with two other related projects, he'll also mention this evening, and they are all dedicated to documenting, preserving, and researching all surviving pre-war Lithuanian Jewish photographs around the world. And he needs your help, people, audience, and hopefully he'll tell you how you might be able to help with his project. So over to you, Richard. He's going to be speaking, so you'll hear him, but you won't see him, but he's got some images that he's going to show us. Although we can't see his face. He's got a technical issue where he is. So let's go to Richard now and hear him talk about his photography project.
Thanks, Rebecca. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Brilliant. So thank you, Rebecca. Thanks to Jewish Renaissance for organising this. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for coming. I'm going to try and share the screen now. Oh, this might not work. Hang on a second. This might take longer than I thought. Let's try and get this done. Can you see the screen? Can you see it?
Yes.
Richard, you want to come out of that share and open the file first?
Yeah, I did that before and it worked perfectly, and now it's not working. Hang on a second. I'm so sorry about this.
No, don't worry. Just yeah.
Bear with me. Why is it gone? Hang on a minute.
It's okay.
I'm very, very sorry.
Don't worry. In the meantime, can I encourage people to send in their comments and questions? Oh, I don't know if you can hear me. In the meantime, if I can encourage people to send in their comments and questions on our chat function, and we can ask the panel more about their work and their experiences in Lithuania at the end of the session. So please do send in any comments you have, and we'll just give Richard a few minutes to show the images.
Oh dear, this is embarrassing.
How are you doing?
I don't know how to find my desktop from this share window.
Okay. I'm just thinking.
If you try minimizing your Zoom window from the corner of the Zoom.
Yeah.
Then you should hopefully be able to find your folder with the images behind.
So I can share the screen and then just open it from the desktop.
Yeah.
Okay,
You might be able to do that.
let's try that, shall
Right.
we?
Otherwise, I would say open the file before you click share screen and then select that file.
Okay, that's a good idea. Let's try that. I'm very, very sorry about this.
Don't worry.
It happened to us all.
Yeah, it happens all
Ah,
the
I think I've done it.
Yay. Lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Are we in full screen?
Yes, yes.
Great. Apologies for that. I don't like doing these horrible online things, but this is how it works. We're here now. So for this very reason, I've kept this talk very, very short and very, very simple, because technology drives me insane. I also apologize for the lack of detail, because there really isn't a lot of time. When I do talk on this subject, I talk about a much smaller part of it, and I usually take about an hour. I'm going to talk 5 minutes. So I'm just going to jump straight in. So I run a very small organization called the International Centre for Litvak Photography. For the first 5 years between 2015 and 2020, we were primarily concerned with going out and engaging with the public. So that involved all sorts of things, like working in schools. I worked in schools for 2 years, organizing events in abandoned former synagogues, up until 2018, when I co-curated a huge exhibition at the Yeshiva University Museum in New York. Most of these projects involved one collection of photographs, which you can see an example of here on the screen now, I think, if we're lucky. These were photographs that I discovered in 2013 that had been smuggled out of the Kovno ghetto in October 1943 by an, at the time, unknown family. Again, I'm not going to go into much detail, but this was, where have I got to? Yeah, so I just want to say that these were the photographs that changed my life. I'm talking this in 2 parts. I'm just going to give you a very brief introduction. So these photographs radically changed my life. They also taught me how important family photographs are in telling and preserving the story of everyday pre-war Jewish life and culture. So to give you an indication of how important the work that I was doing during this first stage, in 2020, we were invited, myself and my co-curators in New York were invited to take the exhibition from New York to the United Nations headquarters in Geneva. And that was a pretty amazing year in lots of different ways. 2020, if you remember, everything was going very well, and then it wasn't. Coronavirus came along just before we were going to get the exhibition opened, and the exhibition was cancelled. All of my public engagement stopped, and the entire nature and purpose of what I was doing changed literally overnight. And now looking back on it, it seems that what I was doing for the first 5 years was I was basically teaching myself a new skill. I was kind of doing an apprenticeship for the things that I'm going to talk about now. Do we have a new image on the screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. So happy. So during the first few months of the pandemic in 2020, I was very lucky. I was given some money by the Lithuanian Council of Culture, who had a special coronavirus related funding opportunity. And I was given money to do more or less anything that I wanted. And because I couldn't do anything with the public, I decided I'd start researching photography in more detail. One thing that I didn't realize at the time was that I kind of assumed that everybody knew a lot more than they do know about Lithuanian Jewish photography and its history. So I started looking into these things, and I started coming across documents in the archives. And one of the documents I came across is the one that I've got up here, handwritten document from August 1941. Obviously, you can't understand what it says. It doesn't really matter. I'll explain to you basically what it is. It's written by an organization called the Žydų turto likvidavimo komisija, or the Commission for the Liquidation of Jewish Property. So there was a Lithuanian organization whose purpose was to empty the homes of recently or soon to be murdered Lithuanian Jews all over Lithuania of their possessions. So we have this kind of interesting, strange and violent time in 1941. We have the murders that we'll know about, but the Holocaust was much more complicated. it was also a bureaucratic operation where they had all of this property had to be removed. This particular document is written by the head of the commission in the Lithuanian town of Rokiškis to the head of the Rokiškis ghetto, and he's complaining, saying that his staff are having to work very long hours doing all this terrible work. It's the most ironic document I've ever come across. What it taught me when I started researching it was that so the organization's job was to go into every Lithuanian Jewish empty home in Lithuania and to strip it of all the possessions, of beds, of furniture, of bicycles, of everything. Everything of value was taken away, and it was either sold or it was auctioned off for good causes. I don't really know what to say about that either. And I worked on this a long time, and I thought about this a lot, and I realized there was one particular item that was absolutely useless and had absolutely no value whatsoever. And these were Lithuanian Jewish photographs. And I did a quick calculation, and I worked out roughly between 1941 and 1942, approximately 5 million Lithuanian Jewish photographs vanished off the face of the earth and were destroyed. So, my research was ongoing. I carried on doing, looking into this family photograph project. I started opening up the area. I started working and looking at museums and archives and libraries in Lithuania and memory institutions in the world. And I started basically assembling a list of everything that survives. And that's basically where I got to now. And this takes us up to 2022. And I'm going to tell you where we are right now. And this is basically where I'm at in 2022. So I'm going to read this out to you. It's very, very simple. Pre-war Lithuanian Jewish photographs provide a unique and irreplaceable record of a civilization that no longer exists. The International Center for Litvak Photography is committed to locating, documenting, and ensuring long-term preservation of the countless surviving examples of these historically important images that can be dated. In the background.
Since her cancer treatment, Corinne's only been working part-time.
Thank you. So I'll start that again. Pre-war Lithuanian Jewish photographs provide a unique and irreplaceable record of a civilization that no longer exists. The International Center for Litvak Photography is committed to locating, documenting, and ensuring the long-term preservation of the countless surviving examples of these historically important images that today can be found scattered in a multitude of public institutions and private homes around the world. And the way that we've decided to do this is to break it down into 3 projects, which is why I'm really talking to you today. As Rebecca mentioned at the beginning, there's probably some help that you can work with. So these are the 3 projects that I'm working on. So the Useless Archive, and the Useless Archive is a digital archive to replace the 5 million photographs that were destroyed with surrogate images that now exist around the world. So I'm imagining that some of the people that I'm talking to this evening are of Lithuanian Jewish origin and have photographs from before the war. You're people that I'd really, really, really like to talk to. The second project is the Useless Catalogue, which is basically a directory of all surviving photographs everywhere in the world. It will also be a much bigger resource than that. It will also feature features and other things about photography, Jewish photography in Lithuania. And then the third project, which is probably not that important to everybody, but I think it's fascinating. All of the few photographs that I've shown this evening were rescued from attics in Lithuania. I've just come across a 3rd collection of Jewish photographs that were found in an attic, and they can't be the only ones. So next year, I'm also embarking on a project to get inside attics all over Lithuania and to try and find some more. And also, incidentally, to try and locate surviving relatives. I'm nearly at the end now. I'm just putting this URL up. Please, somebody who's organising this, if they could write this down and post it in the comments, that would be great. If you do have some time, please go and have a look at this. It shows you all of the information that I really didn't have time to talk about this evening. the two main collections of photographs that I discovered in attics. It also gives you an opportunity to register to become a member of the special interest group that we're starting in 2023. And there's also some other information. And I'm sorry that was really short, and it started with a technical hitch. But that's it. That's all I want to say. Please go and have a look at this this web address, and hopefully we can talk a bit later. That's me. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and glad we got there in the end. That's very interesting. So basically what you're looking for is people whose families left Lithuania before or during the war, and if they have photos of the family, they should get in touch with you, and you can help research the background to those photos, or
photographs and other documents and stories. And the idea is that I don't want the original documents. These obviously belong to the families and these are precious, but the idea is to digitize them. So I would provide a service. I would digitize your photos for you, and I would also take possession of those digital photographs, and we'd add them to this archive, basically.
Okay, well, hopefully we've got a big audience, so hopefully you can help Richard with this project and uncover more of these stories of this incredibly rich life, flourishing life that existed before the war. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to our final guest, and this is JR's art critic, Monika Bohm-Duchen, the writer and curator who's worked for numerous institutions, including the Courtauld, the Tate, the National Gallery, and the Royal Academy of Arts. She is the initiator and creative director of Insiders Outsiders, an ongoing arts festival that celebrates the contribution of refugees from Nazi Europe to British culture. She's just returned from Kaunas, where the work of her mother, the photographer Dorothy Bohm, is on show at the Kaunas Photography Gallery. So Monika, lovely to have you back from Lithuania, and you're going to tell us a bit about your mother's work, but also about the contemporary art, the other contemporary art, I should say, that you've seen in Lithuania on your trip, and a bit of the background to that.
Good. It's a tall order to fit that into just a few minutes, but I will do my very best. I must confess, I feel a little bit of an imposter, not to say a fraud, among this sort of illustrious group of people who have been delving so deeply into Lithuanian history. I do have Lithuanian connections, as you will discover in a minute. I'm also, though, coming to the subject from a different perspective. As Rebecca has just mentioned, I've had the good fortune to have been a tantalizing visit, a very short, sort of a long weekend, just literally came back a day or two ago, where I indeed gave a talk about my mother's work, but also had a chance to see some of the contemporary artwork that forms part of Kaunas's Year in the Limelight as one of the European capitals of culture. And that's very much what I would actually like to focus on. But I will now, without further ado, hold on, hopefully I don't believe it, wait a second. What's happened here? Oh, it hasn't disappeared. Wait, right. I haven't had a technical problem today. We're obviously doomed at here we are. Wait a second. Bear with me, bear with me. Where's it gone? Yes, here it is. There we go. All right. Fine. Are the images visible and hopefully full screen? Is that okay? Yes, yes, good. All right. Oh dear, how very unprofessional. All right, so let me just start very briefly with my lovely mother's work and background. So yes, there is indeed a very personal Lithuanian connection. My mother was born Dorothy Israelite, in fact, to a German Jewish-speaking family, indeed a German Jewish family in what is now Kaliningrad. We heard a little bit about that at the very beginning, then Königsberg in 1924. She's still alive. She's living in Hampstead. She moved with her family when she was 8 or thereabouts in 1932 to what seemed to be the greater safety of what was then Memel, now Klaipėda in Lithuania. I won't say more for lack of time, except that when Gintaras Chesonis, who I thank profoundly, he may indeed be in the audience tonight, approached me with a view to curating and displaying an exhibition of my mother's photography in Kaunas, I hadn't quite realized, I think, at first, how strong the links with Kaunas actually were. Now, my mother, as I've already said, did not live herself in the city of Kaunas, but there were family members who did, who flourished there before the war, and indeed who perished there during the war. And I came across on this visit, one of the darkest moments was indeed encountering information about that side of the family and its fate at the notorious 9th Fort, which I will come back to in a few minutes. But on a happier note, her work, as I think you can see here, you get a little sense of it. It has a lightness of touch. It doesn't deal directly with her traumatic history, in the course of which, as a girl of 14, on the cusp of turning 15, she is sent by her parents to the safety of England, which she made her home, and is eternally grateful to. Let me just give you a tiny taste. The exhibition is on till the 13th of November, if any of you are planning to go in the next week or so, but it's a gallery, indeed, the Kaunas Photography Gallery, lovely old space. Apparently, this space was once occupied by Jewish shops. It's just at the edge of the old town hall square, right in the heart of the old town. Black and white work on one side and color on the other. And I think even this very brief glimpse from afar of her work shows you that there is no direct commentary, as it were, on her ruptured life, on the darker side of her family's history. What she has said, though, I think, in celebrating the joys and fears and other life events of ordinary people around the world, she has said, and I paraphrase slightly, that actually it is because she has seen, as she put it very eloquently, humanity debased during the Nazi period, that she feels it all the more important to stress the dignity of all men, women, and indeed children as well throughout the world, whatever their circumstances. So there is, in other words, there is definitely a rootedness in her life history, which comes across once you know what that history is. But what I'd like to do now is move on to work that formed part of what has been designated the City Telling Festival, created or curated, I should say, with the help of the so-called Memory Office in Kaunas itself. A very extraordinary work, which I was profoundly moved by, which occupies this rather dilapidated building in between the old and the new towns in Kaunas. And you can see, yes, the sort of rather puddle-ridden sort of access the posters that advertise the festival and indeed this particular project. It's by a British-born artist, the daughter of two Lithuanian Jewish adults, young adults, where they survived and lived through the war. They met, I mustn't go on too long, but it's an extraordinarily deeply personal story that she is recreating and evoking and, in a sense, forcing us, inviting us to engage with in this extraordinary multimedia installation, which occupies the interior of this decrepit building. Out of Darkness, of course, the title is very significant. It employs all manner of techniques. Jenny herself started off as a lighting designer, and that theatricality is put to very good effect in the installation. So all I can do really, by virtue of a few really inadequate still photographs, is just to give you a tantalizing sense of the complexity and indeed power of the work. Out of Darkness, it uses neon, powerful lighting effects. It's very interactive. The words here in Lithuanian and English, it's the Lithuanian for fairy tale, but it is actually a nightmare, of course, that she is recreating her parents' history of being saved by being hidden by a Gentile Lithuanian in the Kovno ghetto, as it then was. The room that particularly struck me, I have to say, and which didn't feature in the first rendering of this installation, which incidentally took place in Halifax, of all places, in the north of England, not far from where Jenny lives and works. It was done there actually already a few years ago, but has been adapted so much more pertinently, of course, to the town where her parents' history unfolded. It's a kind of, what can I call it? It's a gaming room where you are invited to sit down, and furniture starts talking to you, telling you stories about her parents' experiences, where you are invited to open books, to open boxes, to play chess with barbed wire chess figures, as you can see. To, by this interaction and deep engagement, understand how much indeed is luck and fate and chance all mingled together. So, you know, Monopoly, a darkly comic Monopoly board, the dreidel from Hanukkah, of course, left, right. I think all of us know the horrendous significance of that in the Holocaust context. It's also an example on the bottom there of how she uses these old suitcases to very dramatic effect, where you are invited. They actually say, almost Alice in Wonderland like, open me, you know, discover what is inside. The detail, and there was a huge amount of detail, one really needed to spend hours in the installation, was this work here, and I wonder it may speak equally, even in reproduction, to many people listening in from this country. The puzzle of the world, certainly of Europe, in pieces, quite literally, during the Second World War, but the only country that's left intact, if you've got good eyes, you will see what I'm getting at, is the United Kingdom. And for somebody like me, who's only here because my mother escaped in time, it is, of course, hugely eloquent. I hope you find this tantalizing. And she has a website, and indeed I met Jenny in person just 2 days ago, and she told me, much to my delight, that she is actually making a film of the installation, which will be available at a later date, because that is really the only thing that might do justice to the richness of the installation. But here's another box where you peer in. You've got these electrical, they're artificial candles, but they flicker ominously, but also, of course, symbolically. And the numbers, for those of you who know anything about Kovno ghetto's history, the numbers allude to the most notorious and huge massacre of Jews in the city's wartime history. And the installation concludes with a room in which visitors are invited to write their comments on luggage labels. Again, I think a wonderfully poignant touch. And as you can see, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of them. And I don't know, Jenny may even be in the audience tonight. I sent her the link, and it would be wonderful if she was. Mostly in Lithuanian, but she's had most of them translated. And I think she's been profoundly moved by the sort of engagement of a public that often has no direct connection to this history, both of locals, of course, and of foreign visitors. And she's also been astonished by the sheer numbers of visitors. And I can vouch for the fact that a very gratifyingly large number of the visitors to this installation are youngsters. They're young people, and they really look, they ponder, you can tell that they are emotionally deeply engaged with this. Importantly, I think, interactive installation. This is not a passive experience. It's one that invites you to be complicit, to actually engage emotionally as well as in educational, more didactic or indirectly didactic ways with the history that she is telling. I want to also just very briefly introduce you to various other things that I encountered and also heard about. The Ninth Fort. I don't know how many of you have been to Kaunas. It's a terrible, dark place, looks fairly, well, innocent enough, I suppose, from the outside. Just, well, not that far, 20 minutes in a car from the center of Kaunas. And you probably can't read the sign there, but there's this sort of grim signage that tells you that this is where thousands of Jews were murdered and indeed burnt by the Nazis. But here too, art intervenes, and I didn't actually expect this. It hasn't been much advertised, whereas in fact Jenny Kagan's project has had a lot of publicity in situ. Bruce Clark, now I'm intrigued because he is London born. I must confess I know very little about him, and I certainly hadn't come across him before. But here's a very deliberate intervention on the first floor of the Ninth Fort, where you are bombarded with the most appalling documentary evidence of atrocity. Bruce Clark has been commissioned to intervene, to mediate, if you like, the experience. And once more, it's a complex work, not as ambitious as Jenny's project, but nevertheless, a still photograph doesn't really do it much justice. And I should say that as well as these shadowy figures on the walls, which obviously reflect and echo the effigies of almost fetal, positioned human forms that are dangling from netting from the ceiling. There is actually is it called a Q code on one of the displays on the as you come into the room, which actually gives you access to a dance performance that actually again mimics the forms and echoes, reinforces the rather ghostly and sinister forms of the permanent objects on display. It's a powerful intervention, I think you'll agree. This is on the far wall as you go through that room, and I think this is also important in terms of making, I think we all share this feeling, don't we, that the past only has meaning if it is brought into the present, if it speaks to us in the present. So here we have these fragments of testimony, and as you can see on the very far wall here is a quotation from somebody who was an Auschwitz survivor. On the right-hand wall, in a sense echoing that sentiment, a survivor of the genocide in Rwanda, and then on the left, even more up to date, alas, alas, a reference to the rape and other terrible things that are happening in the Ukraine as we speak. I didn't see this, but I think, hoping that this discussion might sort of go somewhere if we have time very shortly, it's important to think about different ways in which the past is remembered in art and by artists, whether in a sense first generation and or those who are the descendants like Jenny Kagan of those who lived through the worst but survived or didn't survive in some cases. But here's an exhibition or a work from an exhibition that I understand has been on in Kaunas as part of its stint as the capital of culture. A artist, I think of actually partly Polish origin, obviously long dead as you can see, but actually in a slightly naive style, evoking his memories, of the Shtetl, which of course links up with some of the wonderful presentations we've already had today. And how different is this? And I would perhaps encourage us all to think about the different ways the past can be remembered, the different avenues one might pursue and think about. Jill Bradley, again, it's interesting actually how many of these artists are British based, but with Lithuanian connections. Jill, I think, has no personal connection to Lithuania, but is a Jewish artist based in this country who was commissioned again by the festival to produce these site-specific sculptures. You can see the materials of which they're made. They clearly allude, for those of you mostly I suspect in the audience are Jewish, to the mezuzah. They were very sort of pointedly placed on doorways, but in materials that are very different from a traditional mezuzah, but with the approval and indeed the cooperation of the people who live in those houses now on buildings that were known to have been sites where Jewish families once lived. So I think, a very, very far cry from this much more direct and I won't say simple exactly, but a more sort of naturalistic and indeed nostalgic reference to a past, and here a much more conceptual and much more emphatically contemporary way of dealing with history. Now, I think I could go on, but I'm not going to, because I'm aware of time rushing by and I want to make sure that there is plenty of time for questions. So I will stop there with hopefully plenty of food for thought. Thank you very much. Rebecca, are you going to take over from here? I think you should.
Thank you, Monica. Thanks so much. That's fascinating. And you can still go to Kaunas and see a lot of these exhibitions. They're still on until end of November, early December, I think, aren't they?
It's coming to an end. It hasn't ended yet. Yes, no, I should say, in fact, I just caught the last weekend of Jenny's fine installation. I will perhaps, if you'll just forgive me, there is a kind of coda to this, that one of the star attractions of the whole year of being capital of culture is a very extraordinary exhibition by the South African born and based artist William Kentridge, who is of Lithuanian Jewish origin, which is actually on till the end of November. So that's the one that does actually go on beyond last weekend. But I would also just like to add, I wasn't quite sure whether to say this or not, but I was told pretty much from the horse's mouth that actually his first instinct when he was invited to produce this work for this exhibition in Kaunas was to say, no way do I want to go back to Lithuania, the site of so many terrible things in the past. I think persistence paid off, and he eventually did, obviously accomplish this project, was glad that he'd done so. But I think that's actually quite an important aspect of what
actually, if you can't get to Kaunas, his work is also on show at the Royal Academy of Arts now, so people can go and see his work now, which would be very interesting in light of what you've just told us. And I just wanted to mention one other thing while we're talking about exhibitions and things that are going on in the contemporary sphere. A festival called Shalom in all the world, which is now in its second year, I think, and next year is hoping to showcase the work of your mother, Dorothy Bohm, as part of its festival. It's a showcase of Jewish culture and history in Klaipeda. And that we've covered it in the magazine. I can put information about that on the chat. But there really is a bit of a resurgence, especially on the cultural side, of Jewish arts. So that's another exciting thing that's going on there. Okay, thank you, Monica. And let's move on now to speak to our audience. You can, as I say, you can send me any more comments and questions. We've had quite a few in already. And what we'll do is spotlight the people who have questions. Please, questioners, keep it brief and to the point. And we'll ask our panel, all of them or some of them, depending on who wants to answer, to respond to your questions. So if we could go to Angela Diamond, please. First of all, Angela, if you could ask the panel what your thoughts are and give us your comments, please. You need to start your video as well.
Right, not so sure about starting my video actually, but can you hear me?
We can hear you. We'll go with your voice.
Okay, just a bit of context. I was in Lithuania in 2008. Went to the Open Air Museum in Rumsiskas, which was really, really fascinating. It showcased homes and customs throughout Lithuania, throughout the ages, but absolutely a total absence of anything to do with Jewish culture and life, apart from the famous carnival devil masks, which hung in some of the houses there. In 2008, what I was very conscious of as well was synagogues being destroyed throughout Lithuania. The only reason they hadn't been totally destroyed was because they were running out of money. There was an English language Lithuanian paper which was just deploring the decline in the population of Lithuania after the Second World War, without any mention whatsoever of one of the major reasons of that being a third of the population had been destroyed because they were Jewish. And it seemed to me there was everywhere a complete denial in Lithuania of its Jewish history. It's so different now from what you're saying. What has happened to make this great change? Or is it simply something to do with tourism? And that's my question. Yeah.
Great question. Thank you, Angela. Perhaps we should go to Lara. Do you want to respond to that initially?
I can try to say what I think. First of all, I'm really happy that you admitted, Angela, that it did change, not only because of what we told here, but also because of many things we were not able to mention because it's just too much. And I think for example, in Rumšiškės now, the project of presenting the whole Jewish shtetl of Rumšiškės is going on. And there will be, there has been already for some time a small Jewish exhibit there, included in the total exhibit. And as to the synagogues, many of them were restored. Many of them were beautifully restored. Some of them were not. We were not able to save, but many are in good situation now. I would say the problem is not the building of the synagogue. The problem is the content what is happening there, but the amount of restoration is really big, and not only synagogues like Tel Shai Yeshiva, the famous yeshiva, which building has survived, but of course was used for totally different purposes by Soviets, is now restored as a museum. What happened? As I try to say in my presentation, I think that in previous decades, Lithuanian society was so preoccupied of its own trauma, and there was a great trauma of the war period, of course, uncomparable. And we don't need to compare, actually. It's something totally different than annihilation of the Lithuanian Jewry. But now this encounter with the past, with the history, is actually happening. And what Monica said told about the ninth fort, which is now a modern museum in historiographical meaning, and even as an art exhibit. And the people became more aware, and that's also because that who is dealing with that now is the next generation. The people who were not responsible for the atrocities and don't feel that they need to defend the actual actors of those atrocities from the Lithuanian part. That is my opinion.
Okay, Milda, would you like to add anything to that?
Actually, I think Lara answered like greatly, and I agree with her. It is true, because people became more interested and more aware. They are really trying to learn what happened and more open to it. And this openness makes great things like restoration projects, exhibition projects, and lots of, other work.
I'm going to move on, actually, because we've had a specific question to Monica, which sort of follows on from that question. So it feels appropriate to go to that next. So if we could spotlight or get up Tessa Rayak. I'm not sure of your surname, if I've got that right. Emma, can we get Tessa to ask her question? Also a very interesting question.
Hello. I thought, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I thought I'd put there's my video. Well, don't look, yeah. I just wanted to ask Monica what she felt about the balance in the Kaunas 2022 Capital of Culture Festival between confronting the past, commemorating and confronting and acknowledging and dealing with, on the one hand, and of course showcasing the contemporary life of the city. And if I might add to it, I've been sort of pondering, we haven't managed to get over there, still just might, but I've been pondering the whole theme of, the multicultural interwar life of Lithuania. Is that a good of Kaunas? Is that a good way of looking at it, or is it a kind of a whitewashing? Those sorts of things. So your feelings about that would be really interesting.
I'm so glad you've asked that question, because actually, for lack of time, I didn't engage with the implications of what you're saying. So I shall now try to do so. I mean, let's face it, this is not a Jewish festival. I think one of the really important things that Ruta is going to be doing, or is already doing for the second year, and again next year, in Klaipėda, is that it is apparently, I think I'm right in saying, the first specifically and explicitly Jewish cultural festival in Lithuania. So that is one thing. Kaunas is one of the capitals of culture. It's not just about Jews, quite clearly, to put it crudely, but clearly the Jewish history is absolutely central. And Tessa, as I say, I'm really glad you brought up this issue of terminology. Multicultural, I mean, one of the watchwords, if you like, that have been, dare I say it, rather cynically trotted out in the PR for Kaunas this year is that we must celebrate the multicultural nature of Kaunas in the interwar period. I'm not sure if whitewashing is quite the right word, but you may have a point that somehow it's an evasion of the historical truth that I think, again, forgive me if I've got the numbers slightly wrong, but am I right that at least a quarter of the population was Jewish? That's not quite the same as multicultural in our modern sense, is it? So I'm also uneasy with that term. The other thing, if I can just briefly add to that, which I was going to mention and then didn't for lack of time, is that I'm very much aware that once this year is over, what will be left in terms of acknowledging the richness and indeed the complexity and the richness and the tragedy of Jewish life in Kaunas. And I suspect it's not as much as it should be. So for example, in fact, it was Richard Schofield who was partly my host this last weekend. You know, we were walking back to my hotel in the old town and I was asking about synagogues. There were, and again, forgive me if I've got the numbers slightly wrong, but I believe there were 25 functioning synagogues before the Holocaust. But 9 of them, quite miraculously, 9 of the buildings have actually survived. But how many of them are marked as having been synagogues? I believe none, except for the one that still does function, the famous choral synagogue in which I think most people will know about, and a very grand building it is too. So do you see what I'm getting at? That actually surely as a legacy of this lip service, but hopefully it's more than that, to the Jewish past, something more lasting needs to be created as well, in terms of walking out perhaps more visible markers of that history.
Could we bring in Richard also, because I think I've talked to you quite a bit about how the past is taught in schools and how it's acknowledged, and you've worked quite a bit with young people in Lithuania. Could you tell us a little bit, Richard, about how the country is facing up to its past?
Golly. That's a good one to start with. I'm not the best person to ask. Milda probably has a good handle on this, because she's actually somebody who went to school in Lithuania. But yeah, like I said, I spent 2 years working in schools in Lithuania, and I really just wanted to, I was working with kids aged 15, 16, 17. And I was just basically explaining to them a little bit about the history of the places that they lived. And they know nothing. I mean, they really, really know nothing. On paper, Holocaust education, specifically in Lithuania, looks great, but in practice, it's very, very, very bad. And this actually comes back to something that I wanted to talk about when you were talking about the Open Air Museum. We have this terrible, terrible legacy in Lithuania of the Soviet occupation. And that had such a terrible impact on Lithuanian culture that still resonates now. It's very, very complicated. I actually stood up in a class one afternoon and said, I'm here to tell you about the Lithuanian Jewish history and culture. And a girl stood up and said, no, we know everything about it. I said, well, what do they tell you? And they said, well, we know that the Holocaust happened because the Jews were communists. And this is still taught in schools. I mean, it shouldn't be taught in schools, but a lot of teachers are still telling this. It's very, 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 very complicated. But as Lara said, and as Milda also said, it is changing. It's changing for the better. It's improving on a daily basis. People are stupid everywhere. I think this is another important fact. Nobody knows much anywhere about their own history. It's incredibly complex. As Monica said, it's, actually, as Lara said, Lithuanians have got their own issues to deal with. That is now changing. And it's very, very, very complicated. And the way to deal with it is to talk. And that's slowly what's happening. I just wanted to go back also to talk about the Open Air Museum very quickly. This is Lithuania is a land of irony. So the Open Air Museum at its center is a recreation of effectively a marketplace. And I think there are 15 buildings in total. 11 of those buildings are actually Jewish, although you wouldn't know it.
Recording, Lewis.
Sorry?
Yeah. Grand designs.
You turn.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you. And also the museum, the Open Air Museum, is one of the museums that I've been researching, and they've actually been trying to buy an old wooden synagogue to put there, and they haven't received the funding. Things are getting better, but yeah, 2008 was a very interesting year to be in Lithuania. It was probably around that time that the major shift started. Things are getting better. It's pretty awful here, but it's getting much better.
Milda, Lara, can you, anything else you want to say to add to that?
Just one word about Kaunas as a response to Monica. It is not only, it's not only Kaunas 2022, it began earlier, and many buildings in Kaunas are actually very well marked as former Jewish buildings. Not, I can't vouch safe for everyone, but I know of many. Also, one of the projects of this festival, which is less known, is a book, a research book, but written popularly, which is called The Jews of Kaunas. Two historians worked on that book, and it will remain. It is in English, in English and Lithuanian versions, and it will remain. I have issues with the book. I have issues with many things, like in my own work, first of all, but also with other projects. But still, there are things that will remain after that, and also the team of Kaunas 2022 began their work much earlier, like 2 years earlier, through a series of educational projects that had their impact, and I think educated many people.
You have great faith in books, and of course I do too. But what I was thinking of was something that actually was more in the realm of interactive encounters on a daily basis, perhaps, you know, which is, you know, it's a tall order, it's ambitious, it's costly. I've seen the book, and obviously that's very valuable, but I just wonder, in terms of interventions perhaps on the streets as people go about their ordinary lives, that would be a
have you seen the maps, the maps of Jewish Kaunas, several of them? The Litvak trail in Kaunas, and the Sugihara something. There are special maps which are always in the Tourist Information Center, and also available for the people of Kaunas.
I'm glad to hear it.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thanks for that information, Lara. Milda, anything you would like to add briefly, because we'll start to wrap up fairly soon.
Yeah, just few words about the education. Well, Richard is right, but I still, look at the bright side all the time. So we just started our educational programs, and we feel like, students we visit, they are like a sponges. They really want to know. They're really happy. And when we do at the end of the program, the questions, answers, and the evaluation of the program, they're all the time very positive. What we face is from time to time, not always, but the perspective of the teacher. So they have sometimes strange ideas, and now we are thinking maybe we should educate them as well, besides their students. So because they just without and conscious, say sometimes what is not appropriate, and so we decided to do that, and I hope it's a slowly process. It won't happen in one day or a month. It's for decades probably, but we will continue our work.
You remain optimistic, which is wonderful. And I think on that note, that's probably a good note to end. So thank you so much for all of our guests for joining us today and giving us an insight into the rich Jewish history of Lithuania, but also, as we've just heard, an idea of what's happening with regards to the continuation of acknowledging the past and the continuation of Jewish life in the country into the future. I did just want to mention one thing, and that's that a lot of passion for for this documentation work and research comes from non-Jewish activists. And although that involvement can sometimes be problematic, I think when it's done with understanding and professionalism and with Jewish collaboration and input, it's something that should be applauded. And in the midst of such gloomy news coming from the region, then a lot of what we've heard of that's happening tonight feels quite inspiring. So thank you to all our guests for your thoughts and information about what's going on. And thank you to our audience for joining us tonight. If you're not a subscriber to the magazine and have liked what you've heard here tonight, you can subscribe at our website, jewishrenaissance.org.uk. And on the same website, you can find out about our current lecture programs that are coming up or that are ongoing. So we mentioned the one on Lucian Freud, which concludes with an online lecture this Thursday at 1 p.m. And our new series on the BBC at 100 begins on Monday, the 7th of November at 8 p.m. with a discussion of the European emigres who contributed to that institution. And future speakers include Alan Yentob, Amy Rosenthal, and Mark Damiser. So it's a great lineup, and we hope you've enjoyed tonight and hope to see you at our future events. Thank you very much.